Now, with regard to Hezekiah, if you read in 2 Kings 18 to 20, or 18 to 19, which was a part of the reading for this week, you will see not only is Hezekiah treated very favorably by the book of 2 Kings, by the Deuteronomic history in 2 Kings, but he also had a very close relationship with the prophet Isaiah, who apparently was his sort of court prophet in the same way that the prophet Nathan was King David's court prophet. And we see Isaiah advising Hezekiah with regard to a very, very serious challenge that King Hezekiah faced, and that is the invasion of the Assyrian king Sennacherib in the year 701 BCE. And I'm going to want to talk about that a little later on. But we see in 2 Kings 18 and 19 a very close association between Isaiah and King Hezekiah, the prophet Isaiah and King Hezekiah, and the way Isaiah counsels King Hezekiah in face of this very serious challenge that he faced in the year 701 BCE when the kingdom of Judah was invaded by the Assyrian king Sennacherib. And we read that indeed there was a miraculous deliverance of the city of Jerusalem. We read in 2 Kings 18 to 19 that King Sennacherib had invaded the country, that he had more or less taken over most of the country, that he had besieged Jerusalem, and that he seriously threatened King Hezekiah. The book of 2 Kings 18 to 19 gives some varying accounts as to exactly what happened that led to the salvation of the city, the fact that Jerusalem was not captured by King Sennacherib. One of those reports is a report about an angel of death going out and attacking the army of Sennacherib, killing 185,000 of his troops, which forced him to retreat. There's some hints of maybe some other reasons why Sennacherib retreated. The prophet Isaiah, reports to Hezekiah that the king will not take the city, that he'll hear a rumor or a report that will force him to retreat. It's not really clear exactly what happened. We actually have an account of this invasion from Sennacherib himself. He leaves us a record in his royal inscriptions and his historical inscriptions about this invasion, and he too actually admits that he did not capture the city of Jerusalem, but that Hezekiah sent his tribute and his booty to Sennacherib later after he had retreated, which is consistent with what we read in the Bible as well, that Hezekiah sent booty, a large amount of booty, money, silver, gold, and whatnot from the temple in order to placate King Sennacherib. But we see a very close connection in this account between the prophet Isaiah and King Hezekiah. And we also see that King Hezekiah obviously gets a very favorable treatment in 2 Kings in the Deuteronomic history. He did reform the religious life of the Judean kingdom. He centralized worship in the temple, and he removed a lot of the foreign worship from the temple. And of course, this salvation, this saving of the city of Jerusalem that took place in his day was obviously a very, very powerful message to the people of the kingdom at that time. So that is sort of in response to the question about what was the role of prophecy in the book of Kings, and we see, as I say, a close connection between Isaiah and King Hezekiah in the book of 2 Kings. We're going to see that Isaiah plays another important role, but I'm going to save that to when we go to study the book of Isaiah itself. The other question I asked, two questions in the guiding questions. I asked, how does the writer keep track of chronology? That is, the time frame of each king's reign. And does the writer of the book of 2 Kings, of the Deuteronomic history in the 2 Kings, does the writer mention any written sources that might have been consulted in the composition of these passages? And what I want to say about this in particular is that clearly the writer of 2 Kings, the writer of the Deuteronomic history at this point, the compiler, editor, writer, made use of written historical sources. We know from ancient history, from other kingdoms of this period, from the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, that they kept careful historical records. They kept track of the king's activities, his military activities, his building activities, and we have these records. Well, it's clear that Israelite and Judean kings, the kings of the northern kingdom of Israel and the kings of the southern kingdom of Judah, also kept track of their activities and wrote them, wrote records of what these kings did. And the editors, compilers of the Deuteronomic history here in 2 Kings tell us specifically about these sources. And if you, in fact, in the passages that we just read about King Amaziah and King Jeroboam, we saw this at the very end of these passages. We see that the record actually, the Book of Kings actually keeps track and tells us about the records that they used to keep track of the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. And I'm sorry, I'm hesitating just a bit because I want to find exactly the passages that I'm looking for. Sorry, hang in there. I'm looking for well, I can we can look at one. I don't see anything for Amaziah, but if you go to 2 Kings chapter 14, verse 15, you will see the following. It says, "Now the rest of the acts of Jehoash, the rest of the acts that Jehoash did, his might and how he fought with King Amaziah of Judah, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel?" And then actually you will see that I'm looking for one for the kings of Judah also, and I'm really sorry, but I can't find it right offhand. But there are similar references to the kings of Judah. Here it is. In verse, if we keep going in verse 17, it says, "King Amaziah, son of Joash of Judah, lived 15 years from the death of King Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz of Israel. Now the rest of the deeds of Amaziah, are they not written in the book of the annals of the king of Judah, the kings of Judah?" So, in other words, in 2 Kings 14, verse 15, we have reference to a book of the annals of the kings of Israel. And then in the same chapter, chapter 14, at the end of verse 18, we have a reference to the book of the annals of the kings of Judah. So these are clearly written sources that the editor, compiler of the Deuteronomic history here in 2 Kings made use of. He had written sources that he used to compile his Deuteronomic history. There's also, by the way, a reference in 1 Kings 11:41 to a work known as the Book of the Annals of Solomon. Another source, another book, another reference, another thing that was consulted, another book that was consulted by the compilers and editors of the Deuteronomic history to be able to create their history. Clearly, the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah were keeping track of their activities in these annals, and these annals were then used to compile this history. So that's what I want to talk about, these passages from the book of Kings. Now, let's go on and talk a little bit about prophecy. First of all, I normally, when I do this lesson in class, I make use of a couple of video recordings that I have of the great American leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I use these videos primarily because I want to make the point that actually I feel like I had the privilege, quite frankly, of living through a period of time when I was a young man in which America actually did experience prophecy. I consider Martin Luther King to have been a prophet. And I want to tell you why. I want to tell you why in regards especially to the understanding that I don't see a prophet as somebody who is like a sort of a fortune teller. I don't think prophecy is about predicting the future. A prophet does not have a crystal ball. A prophet doesn't use tarot cards to predict the future. I think the meaning of what I mean by a prophet when I say that Martin Luther King was a prophet is I mean something else altogether. And I use actually two video clips, which I'm not going to be able to show you now. But I would urge you, maybe if you have some time, to go and Google these two video clips and to watch them. And perhaps by watching them, you'll see what I mean by Martin Luther King as a prophet. So what I mean is this. The first video clip that I show is what we call the mountaintop speech. And this is a speech that Dr. King gave actually on the very night before he died. He was in Memphis, Tennessee, supporting a group of sanitation workers, a union of sanitation workers who were striking for better pay and for better working conditions. And there was going to be a major demonstration the next day. There was some threat from the city of Memphis, the leaders of the city of Memphis, that they were going to enforce an injunction and try to stop the march. And the people who were supporting the march and the marchers, the sanitation workers themselves, were meeting the night before the march was to take place in a church in Memphis to sort of rally, to get ready for what might have been a confrontation between the marchers and police the next day if this injunction was going to be issued. And it turns out that Dr. King was not feeling well that night and stayed in his hotel room. But the people who were gathered for this rally at the church really wanted to hear from him. Excuse me. So his supporters, his staff, went to get him from the hotel. Urged him to come to the church and speak to the people assembled. And he did come, and he gave this famous mountaintop speech. And he said, we have very difficult days ahead. He said, but I'm not really worried. He said, because I've been to the mountaintop. He says, God has allowed me to go to the mountaintop and look over at the promised land. And he said, I may not get there with you, but I know that we as a people will get to the promised land.